feedback. So I'll come back in a moment and look at the reasons you're here and try and use that as we go through. It's really helpful to me to have context and try and make the webinar as relevant as possible. So we're talking here about dealing with underperformance. Just introducing myself for those of you who don't know me. My name's Lucinda. I've got corporate L&D background, many years in that. I host the HR Uprising podcast. So I've done a couple of podcasts on this topic, and I'm also really interested in change. And my day job is CEO and a sort of lead consultant for Actus. And Actus is about performance, talent, and learning management. And I guess there are links, of course, with performance, because I suppose performance management is all about trying to get people to perform. Underperformance is where people aren't, and those things do tie together. I think the question is how we measure it, how we recognise it, and what can we do about underperformance. So the outcomes that I'm going to sort of focus in on is what is underperformance, what causes it, how can we set up for success, be positive about dealing for underperformance. Also, how can we effectively measure and increase performance? And I'm going to tip into productivity because I'm inspired this week by the report about the 4-day week and productivity. So one of the things I want to explore with you is what's the difference between performance and productivity, and see what we think about this. And with that, thinking about how can we increase performance and productivity for the future. So I said I'm going to make it interactive, and it gives me a chance when I put a slide up like this, asking you to answer a question, because it allows me just to go through the chat and see what your responses are and what interests you. So thank you for all of you who put in the chat and introduced yourselves. My question to you is, what do you consider underperformance? And again, it might be linked to why you're attending this webinar, so why you want what you get out of it. So tell me what underperformance looks like to you in your organisation. And I'm just going to have a little look through. Oh, okay. Minefield legislation case. Okay, some really nice general reasons. So general interest in this. So yeah, great. Okay, so what we've got, not being able to meet expectations in the business, says Liam, absolutely, for a multitude of reasons, and that is key, and not knowing what the reasons are. Not meeting targets, deadlines, and poor quality. Failing to meet objectives or standards, lack of motivation, not meeting targets, poor efficiency and poor attitude, employees not meeting expectations or poor quality of work. So those are the sort of things. So underperformance. So those sound like really, great definitions of underperformance to me. In terms of that, we'll come at again, failure to meet expectations, says Jasmine, getting the best out of people, because it's a subtle thing as well, isn't it? Because this is one of the things that I suppose is a grey area, and I actually don't have the answer, but I think it's worth thinking about. And Jasmine, you're kind of, Jordan, you're kind of getting there, is if you don't know what someone's capable of, how do we know if they're underperforming? So actually, are we getting the best out of people is an interesting one, isn't it? And maybe it's harder for us to know that at the moment in terms of what people's full potential are. Are people working to their full potential? So just building on that, and to make it easy for everybody to participate, I've also got a poll here to see what your thoughts are. And there's 2 questions on this one here. So if none of that, you can choose, it's a multiple choice, the first one, and actually I probably should have done another. So if you were in a situation where you are experiencing from people around you or people that you manage sorts of underperformance, I'm interested in what kind it might be that you're seeing. And my definitions might be a little bit hit and miss there. So what sort of things are you seeing? And I'm interested, the second question is, do you think this is the same or different to pre-COVID? And what I didn't helpfully write is whether it's different, is it more or less? So if you said it's different, could you say whether you think there's more or less of it? Because that will give us a little bit more in there. So that's interesting. So a lot of the things, so no one so far, I know you can't see it yet, I'll give a few more people a chance to respond, has gone gross misconduct, as in it's straight people just like stealing or punching someone in the workplace. It's all more subtle. So it's low productivity, I'm seeing that teamwork, behavioural stuff, so more sort of subtle, maybe operating against the values. So I've got 1 come through there. So that's interesting. Keep going, I'm up to 78%. So I'll just give you 5 seconds for anyone who hasn't had a chance to respond, and then I'll share the results with you, because that's really quite interesting here. So quite a few of you have gone, it's different to COVID. So could you just ping in the chat whether it's what the difference is, just to help us have that context there. So I'm just going to come back to the chat. So you can see that actually we're seeing underperformance is coming through as low productivity. So that's interesting. This is one of my questions when I was preparing about this, is that they're just not being as productive potentially. Negative behavior, more sort of behavioral misconduct and negative behaviors I can see. So perhaps people not not being supported, maybe being negative in certain environments, that sort of thing. Again, we don't know the causes of this. I'll talk about that later. Lack of delivery, so outputs, not enough outputs or visibility of delivery potentially. Persistent absence and sickness, interesting. Teamwork and communication. So quite a mix there. And then what we're seeing here, interesting. So Paula, you're seeing increased sickness absence. Are people for you still working remotely? Because there was a school of thought during COVID that because people were working remotely, that it was easier to do presenteeism. As in, if you were ill, you could remain at your desk. Let's have a see what the other people think. Laura, absolutely. When is work volume? So they've got too much, so they just actually were being unrealistic in terms of what people can do. So how do we know that that's what they're able to do? When do you think it's maybe different reasons? What sort of reasons do you think are different now? Okay. It's warehouse stuff that's increasing. Okay, so that would logically, Paula, that would make sense. And I don't want to jump ahead to reasons for why people do it, but so it's the people who would come into work, if they're suffering from stress or depression or whatever, mental health, then they physically their absenteeism is more visible. So we don't know. Taking longer breaks, being at home, Karen, yeah, but do we know that's happening? So that almost links into people's general malaise or apathy. Interesting. Right, really useful. Keep on putting that in there, really get it. And some of you who's just said this, like a visit, Hayley, this is what I was wondering about here. Is it a visibility thing? For those of us who have got people working remotely, is it that we didn't see when people weren't performing when office-based? Is it that we're not seeing underperformance when remote, or we're seeing more of it, or we're assuming it because people are less visible? I just wonder how much of this is related to either our visibility of people. So if we don't see somebody sitting at their desk doing stuff, and they're not automatically responding on Teams or whatever it is, do we assume that they're not performing? Or are we actually seeing their outputs or their actual performance? I think, what part does visibility play into this when people are remote? And also, I suppose, if there are real issues, which there's notes here to mental health issues, things like that, were we, if the people who are remote, have they got, do we know that they're happening? I suppose because it's easier for them to hide it potentially. So one of the questions there, so visibility is interesting here. Let's see. Lack of resource is impacting things. You can spend 10 minutes on the phone with someone in the office, which is fine, but you do that at home. It shows you as managers where you've gone. Interesting. Yeah, so you need to have trust, don't you, for that sort of thing. So that does that. But then again, we shouldn't be assuming that someone's not performing in that situation, but then people become a little bit more paranoid about it. So let's have a look. So this piece here that I was just wondering, where does performance and productivity intersect was sort of my query. And I'm going to come back and talk to you a little bit about that and ask your views on that. But certainly, are we clearly measuring productivity? And this was one of the things that, I don't know, have you seen this, the news on the 4-day working week? So they've come up with the results. If those of you, I'll assume that you haven't, just in case. But they did a pilot. It's a UK pilot is the results I'm referring to, and about 60 odd companies signed up to this 4-day working week. And the results are out. So I think they've done it for 6 to 8 months, and 55 out of 63, something like that, companies are going to either carry on the pilot or take it on full time. and I think only 3 or 4 have said they're not going to do it anymore. So overall, the results seemed really positive. And I've got a thing later about what the results were that came through from it. Although for me, it also brought extra questions up. So I have questions about, well, how do we know that they're more productive? Because unless you are in a certain type of environment where you're measuring performance really, really well, which, yes, if you're in a manufacturing environment, it's much more tangible measuring performance. But if you're in a professional service actually is a bad example, because if you measure hours, you're measuring it. But if you're in a sort of less tangible environment, and we know, I mean, take the NHS for an example, lots of performance management processes lapsed during COVID. People got out of the habit of having those routines. I know in the NHS, people didn't even have to have appraisals for 2 or 3 years. So actually, how do we even know what performance is? Have we got out of the habit of setting expectations and goals with people? So people might be underperforming because they don't have clarity about what good performance looks like. So it all just seems a bit murky at the moment for me. And I think it's just something that makes me think, what do we need to do to get people back and clear? I mean, certainly it isn't easy. So Harvard Business Review states that 18% of top execs say holding others accountable is really hard. It's really hard for a top exec, let alone a middle manager. We know that poor performance is really time consuming and not enjoyable. So people are going to avoid it if they can. So if someone's working from home, you don't have to jump on their back about their performance, then probably you could think that where we think underperformance is going up, managers may well have taken their foot off the gas in terms of giving clarity and giving structure and agreeing goals. We know we've got changing environments and priorities, which is confusing. We know that we've always been bad at measuring outputs, but in order to measure performance, we've got to define and measure outputs. It's challenging. It's not easy. There was a point earlier about the trust. You know, actually, if you think that somebody, if we immediately suspect that somebody's swinging the lead just because you can't see them on Teams for 10 minutes, then that's going to create an atmosphere where people don't feel motivated to work. And they may not be underperforming, but then they feel demotivated, so they're not going to put the extra mile in anyway. And there's loads of legitimate stressors. So even though we're beyond COVID, there's still all the illness things that have gone on. We've got the knock-on effects of mental illness, and now we've got huge financial stresses on people. So time, you know, there's no question that there's still plenty of things for people to feel stressed and anxious about, which is of course going to have a knock-on to work. So it's a challenging time here. So one of the things I want to do, I've got another question to throw out to you guys, and then I'm just going to run through our the chat here and look at some of the feedback that you've been putting in. Thank you. So let me just work out how to find my poll. So I alluded to this one earlier. And my question to you is, would you consider productivity and performance the same or very similar? Or, you know, if someone's unproductive, are they underperforming? And if not, what's the difference? And this is a genuine question. I haven't got a definition for this. I'm looking to you because I've been thinking myself in circles on this one myself. So quite a lot of you so far are saying no. So it'd be really interesting to see what's the difference in your view. And I'll just go and look at the other comments before we come back to your thoughts on this. So we're thinking that some of the difference is quiet quitting. Interesting one, Hayley, yeah. Impact your workplace, which is low average age of employees. So people have actually not, they're disengaged, basically quietly quitting, doing the bare minimum. So a lot of this feels like disengagement, doesn't it? Engineers looking to run down their days. People might be being productive in terms of quantity, but actually the quality isn't there, Laura said, and actually that's someone else agreed. How much gets done by how much is done well. So there's something about quality. It's interesting, isn't it? Right, so Mike's gone, he thinks performance is about the attitude of the individual, productivity is a more quantifiable measure. Yes, I guess you could have yeah, okay, I've got you. So you could have low quality productivity, got you, but which wouldn't be high performance. So we're saying then, would we be saying that if you are highly productive to a high level of quality, then you're a high performer? And even if you were productive, but the quality wasn't there, then you're maybe a moderate or lower performer. And I suppose the quality could be a cause of, it could be something where we see someone is underperforming because the quality of their output isn't there, even though they've got the quantity. Yeah, okay, that kind of helps. Thank you. So let's see. So there's certainly some similarities. I think there's definitely an intersection here of them. And these were your thoughts. And I've just got one more question. And don't worry, I don't know who says what here, but I just wanted to see, and given I've kind of lumped them together, is that going to let me do it? For some reason, it doesn't want to let me do this one. Poll. Have I stopped it? Okay, I put one up here which was saying, how productive do you feel yourself in here, but it's not letting me launch it for some reason. Let me just check I'm not done something wrong. Single choice, my fault. Try again. Right with you. There we go. So, and then I was just thinking, if you were to think about your own level of performance, productivity, interpret it as you want, where do you feel you are? Because I wonder whether this is a sort of energy thing, that we're all feeling a bit lapsed, even though we're, clearly you're motivated, you've joined a webinar out of choice about underperformance. But if you were to think about your ability to evaluate your own performance / productivity, let's assume that our performance is about high quality productivity, so that quality performance, where do you see yourself at the moment? Just interested in terms of a self-assessment. And don't worry, I won't be sharing that with anyone. I can't see, I'm just getting a sense of it. Okay, we've got 100% answer. Got 72% on that one. Let me share that with you. Well, if you've got a different scale to your managers, then it's have we shared view with our manager, maybe such a performance, then we shouldn't, should we? That's actually really, really valid. So if we have got underperformance, and some of you raised this already, what tends to cause underperformance? Well, you can argue lots and lots of things, but I've always found that you can usually broadly bundle them into these 4 headings. And the reason it's quite helpful to bundle them into these 4 headings is you can then think more holistically about how you can address the underperformance, because you can think, once you understand the causes, we can think what's most likely to enhance it or improve it. So the first one, so we've got clarity, individual attitude or will, skill or knowledge, and surrounding environment. So let me define those in this context. So the first one is lack of clarity. So how does that cause that? Lack of clear goals, objectives, or milestones. Or if we've got goals or milestones, they're not smart, or they're not about outputs, right? So they're not clearly measurable. Maybe we don't know what our job description or responsibilities are, our priorities have changed, our environment's changed, our people are working. We have had little or no feedback on our performance or behaviour. So those of you who are saying tongue-in-cheek, I think this is where I am, but I don't know if my manager thinks it's the same way. Well, actually, that's an argument where there's not enough clarity. And that's where, of course, performance management, we should be having those conversations, agreeing clear goals and agreeing clearly how people are performing and how they feel they're performing, so that they have that clarity. And that might come down to the fact that there's a lack of structured performance management activities, or there's not enough communication or structure by the line manager. So lack of clarity, that's one really key one, and probably one of the most important. Individual attitude or skill, I always think this is quite an interesting one, where if you are in HR, which I know some of you are, this is where line managers come to you and say, oh, so-and-so is an underperformer. They're just choosing, they're kind of seeing it as, they're thinking the worst of the person. They're assuming that just because they are talking to someone that then they're assuming the worst. But actually, why is that person? If it's true, first of all, it may not be true. But if the person is choosing not to perform, which is really what we're saying here, the quiet quitters someone referred to earlier up the chat, well, why might that be? Is it that the person isn't motivated? Is it they're in the wrong job? They are fed up, they want to improve, they've maybe not bought into the organization, so they feel they got the wrong job, they were missold the job. Maybe they've been offered training, but they haven't taken advantage of it, so they're not really taking responsibility for it. Or maybe they're unwell, suffering from stress or burnout. There are likely to be causes for that attitudinal issue. And depending on what the cause is, of course, depends on whether or not you can do something about it. Certain situations where you've got a square peg in a round hole, that maybe you need to address it. But actually, usually, this individual attitude or skill is caused by something else. So when I look at let's say the clarity, the motivated, maybe the person or choosing not to perform, maybe the person hasn't got clarity about what's expected. If they're not trying to improve, maybe they haven't had very clear feedback about the consequences of not meeting certain targets and objectives. If they're not bought into the organisation, well, that's a real shame, but maybe that's something where they haven't been inspired, or they haven't got a great relationship with the manager. Someone hasn't taken a clear interest in them and helped them align their goals and their long-term goals and objectives with it. If they've been offered training and aren't using it, well, did they understand why the training was going to benefit them and what would help them? And if they're unwell or suffering from stress, etc., have they got the support they need, or is there anything we can do about it? So it's interesting, really. Often the solution to this one isn't always just get rid of the person, they're a bad egg. It's often one of the other ones you can come up with, you can help them with it. So skill, this is probably, I don't know, this used to be less common, but I think one of the challenges we might have now are people who have joined the workplace during COVID and have got relatively, this is all they've known, and they may never have been taught. They've all had to be self-taught. They may have been given insufficient instruction or training. The role modeling that they may have had isn't necessarily useful. They haven't had maybe as much opportunity to practice skill. And skill, it could be they don't have the capability, but it's probably going to be one of the above. So you've always got to have that open mind as to whether they've got that capability. Yeah, that's true, Caroline, isn't it? And maybe the job descriptions then might not match the actual role once you get into it, because people don't understand what it is. And it's also, well, I think roles change and evolve so much, and in a sort of hybrid environment, there's a huge degree of sort of almost ability to make it up for yourself and initiative and things like that, that might actually come with confidence for people that they may not necessarily have developed yet. And then surrounding environment can affect performance as well. So, you know, if we are working remotely, and thankfully most of us, we shouldn't have children at home now, but that was when they have, but you can still have plenty of distractions in your home environment, or maybe you haven't got a good setup in your home environment. Outside stressors, so the family environment can make a difference in terms of that sort of thing, or perception with things like, I don't know, visibility on Teams or something. Then maybe that becomes the norm, the cultural norm, where people don't feel visible, don't feel it, they're not very responsive. It's not like when you're in an office, get that. So perhaps people don't get the support they need from their environment in order to perform. I mean, so all of those are legitimate reasons. And the reality, if I was doing a training managers on how to deal with underperformance, you say keep an open mind. So be tough on the facts. Is this person performing or not? But open-minded as to the reasons. And the reasons will usually fall into one of these categories: are clarity, individual skill, individual attitude, skill, or surrounding environment. So if they don't have clarity about what their job is, what's expected, then actually, what do we need to do about that? We need to give them clarity. And actually, in my experience, clarity is probably one of the most common reasons for underperformance. And you think about this productivity, and again, going back to that 4-day working week thing, is, well, clarity is going, what does good performance look like? And how do I replicate this? And actually, how do I then demonstrate high productivity in an output-driven way that would allow me to measurably continue to do this? So do I know how to be performance? Do I have clarity? And is my perception of high performance the same as my managers, you know, or my direct reports? And that really is about really clear conversations, documenting, it's classic performance management, documenting clear agreed goals and KPIs so that people know what's good, know what's expected of them, and feel they're achieving. In terms of the individual attitude, I think it's about being open-minded, because there could well be underlying issues. People still don't want to be underperformers. No one wants to be. So maybe they don't realize that they're underperforming, or maybe there's something going on, stresses, etc., that's causing it. In terms of the skill, to take it, there's loop clarity that goes through all of these. People have clear expectations that they need to perform at a higher level, so they have clarity that their performance isn't quite where it needs, and that should give them the motivation to do the and get that doing is, then it's not that it's more of a problem. And then that surrounding environment, other things, it does depend on what that issue is. So if it is a family issue, we need empathy. We need to understand people that. But if it's something where the perception is cultural, then maybe we need to look at addressing the culture that we have in terms of visibility or normal behaviour or responsiveness from people, or workload or hours worked, etc. So thinking about what category or categories that type of underperformance might fit into makes it easier for us to work out how we can address it. And these are some of the ideas that I would want to do. I would really want to go back and think, how output driven are we? And genuinely, I've got people on my team on this call, and I'm thinking, oh, I've been thinking this all week actually. How good are we on our outputs? Have we lost our sort of structure of outputs, where we've had times when we've been really clear on what our outputs are and our goals, and then but it doesn't have to be top down or from HR. It could be just agreeing it with the individual. If possible, get something systematized, because then you can get a clear productivity metric. And if you did want to go and do something like your 4-day week or a flexible working, then you have a baseline of what good productivity looks like that would allow you to maintain it. Make sure the managers have got the skill about not just feedback, but agreeing good quality objectives, and are brave enough to talk to somebody about whether they're performing or not. How do you think you're performing? That becomes a conversation. What does great performance look like? What do you need to do? So they inspire that person to perform. And make sure that if you've got issues with behaviours, which some of you said you had to start with, well, are clear behavioural expectations defined in your organisation, whether it's competencies or values or cultural behaviours? And are they modelled in the organisation? So is it that certain key leaders are modelling less helpful behaviours? Maybe someone needs to have a conversation with those about that. And I think more than anything, empower the individual to assess or report on their own productivity. One of the things that they did as one of the measures in the 4-day week was look at the individual's measure of their own productivity, which obviously would be quite easy to fudge. If you're loving having a 4-day week, then of course I'm going to go, yeah, I'm even more productive than I was before. But that said, we all know how productive we are. You were all able to say where you thought you were. And you know, when you go, oh, I've had a really productive day, you feel good. Or when you've had a less productive day, you feel less good. So actually getting into that habit of thinking about that, I think, is something which is worth doing. It's almost a good habit to create within your organisation or team. And this point about the really flexible working weeks, perhaps maybe we need to think really differently about, maybe our old measures of productivity and underperformance are outdated. And it does depend on the environment you're in. But could we think really differently? Are there ways of being really flexible in terms of working? It, again, completely depends on the job that you can do. If you are in a manufacturing organisation or customer services where you've got to answer the phone at certain times, then it may really vary. But, you know, what can you do to think differently for the future? And again, if any of you tried anything like this or thought of any really creative ways to go at this, because what this is talking about here is actually motivating people. And it's helping people think. People are fatigued at the moment. There's relentless misery, if you like, in the backdrop, isn't there, of bad stuff. And it's really easy for, and you know, and we're in February, and like January went on for years. So it's really easy for people to feel flat and demotivated, and our resilience levels, it's normal that people don't feel like resilient. So how can we be creative about motivating people to want to put everything into their job and their lives, just to energize people, to feel energized? So is it one of the things like flexible working 4-day week, or is it about coming up with things like creative benefits for people? I spoke to somebody yesterday about that, how they were putting in whether it's a nutritionist or a massage therapist who comes to the office, or fruit, or whatever it might be, creative little touches that might energize people, make them feel valued, just help them to be productive. Coaches, mentors in the organization, opportunities for learning. What do people need? Talk to them. What do they need to be productive? To find those out. And sorry, I think I've referenced this a million times. My slide was right at the end. I say, for me, the 4-day week trial, I just thought it was interesting. It's almost, is it a counterintuitive way to reduce underperformance? So get people to work less hours, but increase performance. So I said 92% of the organizations continued. Apparently, business performance and productivity scored on average 7.5 out of 10. Which was higher, and certainly the ones that were on Radio 4 on Monday said that they had increased productivity, so they were able to measure it by 2%. They worked 20% less and increased productivity by 2%. Of course, the attrition, massive benefits in terms of lowered absenteeism and attrition, and huge increases in health and well-being. So that's all great, isn't it? I mean, I must say, I've still got lots of questions. I've been trying to delve into the detail, but it's not that much visible detail yet. I'm hoping to get the people who did it on the podcast. My questions would be, of course, once that becomes the norm, a 4-day week becomes the norm, do then people go into apathy about 4-day week, and it kind of slides down because you start to take for granted what you want, and also how challenging it is to measure productivity genuinely and baseline it. So those are the things that I think are still quite tricky for many organizations, but I still think it's worth thinking about. It's something a bit different, and maybe something for us to think about for the future. So any ideas that you've got, I'd love to hear. Any questions you've got, I'd love to hear. Let's see what Mike says. So questions. Okay, this is a good question. Mike first. So Mike's put a question out so others, and think, be interested in anyone else's feedback. Do you feel that you're getting a different attitude in new starters that have arrived over the last 2 years? Particularly, you're looking at grads or younger engineers. So this would be people who perhaps haven't worked in the pre-COVID workplace. Feel they come over as having different values or work ethic, which may come across as poor performance. So is this about a different set of expectations from the managers and the individuals? I mean, that's a fascinating one, isn't it? I can see that if you come in to work remotely, and then they've never seen, people have never seen how people operate, in the norms, if you like, have only been COVID norms that these people have experienced. I certainly, one of the things that I have heard quite commonly is that sort of the younger people coming to the workplace can come over as being a little bit more insular. So, and if I explain, or less collaborative, but this isn't saying they intend to do that. It's because, again, of workplace norms. So I interviewed a lady on the podcast last week on collaboration, and she was saying it's things like, even though you might think that mentally someone wants to collaborate and be supportive and helpful, they kind of go, well, I'm just working in my bubble, and they're not aware of the fact that they need to save something in a shared place or proactively share information, because they're kind of in that bubble of their office, and they've not had that level of sitting with somebody and someone saying, oh, have you got that bit of information, that active information sharing. So maybe that's about how we induct people, and being very clear about behaviours that otherwise 5 years ago, someone might have joined an organisation, they would see these behaviours demonstrated. People go, I'll put it on the shared drive. It would be overt. You'd interrupt someone, you'd ask someone for information, you'd share information when you bumped into them. Oh, I've just been talking to so-and-so, that's your client. That doesn't happen organically now. And so there is less informal information sharing, and people entering the workplace now have never seen it happen. So they're not aware that something's missing. Anyone got a comment on that? I bet Nicole's got that. Okay, so you've had different, so people are coming really enthusiastic to perform, and the challenge is keeping them motivated. What's that for? When the peer pressure not to perform, is that what you're saying, when peer pressure from others starts to kick in, or pressure, is that what you mean by the peer pressure? There's a pressure to be a little bit less on it. Yeah, I'm sure that's it. The younger people coming in there's definitely some reverse mentoring that would be capable. So any thoughts or questions? Oh, great, the chat's just coming through now. Just while you put those up there, let me just remind you, we're going to do a series of change webinars so they're all going to feed through those. So the next 3 webinars are going to be about change. One is about managing or leading others through change if you're someone there. So that would apply to anyone as an individual. The next one is about planning and managing culture change. So often the challenge is we talk about culture now. Could apply to anybody, but it's slightly more organizational as opposed one's about which is more strategic. So if you had to plan strategic change, how would you manage a large project there? Any of these links will be sent out to you if you want to sign up for those. And also all of these resources, which are linked to what we've just talked about, all about underperformance here. There's more here in terms of the webinars, etc. Let me just check on the chat here, and also let me put my final poll up in case anybody needs to disappear off this. We've hit our 10 past. As ever, if there's anything that anyone would like us to follow up with, let me just pop that up so that you can see it if you wanted to. I can't launch it, Kate.